Good day, colleagues. This is our episode where we are going to discuss what is memory in cognitive psychology. Yes, and the objectives of our lesson after this episode, at least we should supposed to define memory as a basic cognitive process, and also to understand the components and certain parts, and also to outline some certain factors surrounding the researches surrounding memory. The models and other issues, we will talk about them in the next episode. But also brace for forgetting. Also read around about forgetting, because memory and forgetting works hand in hand. And also memory and eyewitness in trials works hand in hand. Coming back to our episode, memory is defined by Tauvin and Craig, 2000. They mentioned that it's a means by which we retain and withdraw our past experiences, or to use that information in the present. In other words, it's like a dynamic mechanism associated with storing information, retaining information, as well as retrieving information about past experiences that we've gone through. Yes, specifically, they always say cognitive psychologists are in the issues of memory. They look in the aspects of encoding, storage, and retrieval. That's why I find such processes are also similar in computers. When the study of artificial intelligence was also coming into place, cognitive psychologists also come into place, if you still remember the history of cognitive psychology, when they try to understand the wiring of our minds. Yes, so the encoding, it comes from the transformation of sensory information that is represented, or for mental representation. The storage now, it comes as you keep encoded information in your memory, long-term memory, sensory memory, working memory. Of course, with sensory memory and short-term memory, it's just brief, but have been stored briefly, but there it goes for encoding. Then in the retrieval, that's where you recall, you recognize, or you relearn information. That's retrieval, where you put that information in your memory, then you put it for present use. So coming back to encoding, that is the process where information is what do you call it, is fixed in what? In our memory systems. So we receive information from sensory information from the environment through our eyes, nose, ears, skin, and so on. Then it enters our minds, isn't it? Yes. Sometimes when we are encoding as well, perception will also play a role. Yeah, once you are recognizing some certain things which we are not aware of, or some other things, sometimes you may start to rethink other things. Or once you're encoding, in encoding as well, in the emotions, they may play a role. Mental representations also may play a role. Acoustic play a role, as well as meaning. So, for example, when someone asks you what you ate for lunch today, some things which happened today, isn't it? Yes. You will recall it quite easily since it's an automatic process, or the details about time, space, frequency, and meaning of words are all what? Engulfed in the same scenario. But then we ask you tomorrow, you may still remember, but some facts it depends on the situation, how vibrant was the situation. Yes. Then now looking at semantic. Looking at what? At semantics. Semantics, that's the encoding of words and their meaning. That's semantic encoding. Visual encoding, which include images. Acoustic encoding, which include sound. Yes. So when it comes to issues, that's one of the scenarios, like an example which is put there, like words were divided into 4 categories of meaning. For instance, yes, I'm quite sure most of the words which are quite familiar, or some words that you can still remember, which are related to love and other emotions which are quite basic because of the meaning that they carry, or even some facial expressions. It's easier for us to understand them because of some certain meanings that they carry, not only remaining on words, but just putting the meaning. The visual encoding, then another experiment which was tried of like, read over the list of words: car, level, dog, truth, book, and value. So according to the research, most of the people were found easily to remember car, dog, and book. The words car, dog, and book. And you have a difficulty recalling level, truth, and value. Why? Because these words are mentally represented. Taking you back to grade 1 ECD, A, E, O, U. What is this? A dog. You see, they try to put all these efforts in visual acoustic as well as meaning, isn't it? Yes, so that you won't do an effortful processing. You just try to do an automatic processing. When we say effortful processing, where you need require a lot of work and attention on your part in order for you to encode that information or to remember. And mostly it always happens when we are learning as well, or difficult aspects. For example, mathematics. Then now moving to storage. There are quite a number of scenarios when it comes to storage. Sensory memory, short-term memory, and then long-term memory. So storage, in another words, there's components of memory as well, in another words, or also in another research books, they will tell you that that's components of memory, since memory is very vital in our day-to-day scenarios. So it starts from sensory memory. Then this encoding and what happens, and then it goes to short-term memory. In sensory memory, it doesn't last longer. It lasts milliseconds. See, 0 to 4 seconds or milliseconds. 0 to 4 seconds. That's how it may last within your memory, within that sensory memory. Very good example, you're watching a television set, then switch off the TV. Yes, of course, it turns black, but in your memory, you may still try to visualize, or in your eyes, there may still some remnants of that picture. Why? Because, and if you study the time that it lasts, you'll find out it doesn't last longer. Other than in short-term memory, when you hear a song, you may walk a certain period of time trying to remember the song, but due that you don't know the words or some specific words, you may forget some instant. So sensory memory is the one which absorbs information from environment. So in the short-term memory, it tries to link the information with what? With long-term memory. So there's an experiment, a study of sensory memory researched the significance of value on information on short-term storage by J. Stroop, or what they call the Stroop effects, where some certain words and numbers were put and also colors, like words were written and colors. Let's go to that page and see for ourselves. Like recall these words. So most of the people, when they see color, they have a difficulty to pronounce the name. Why? Let's put it here. Like for example, upon seeing the word yellow in green print, you should say green, not yellow. So the fact that you saw the word red, it just talks to you within your mind because you know red already. Then you say, what color is this? You read red, but you have to read the color, not the name. You see, yes. So try this experiment at home with fellow kids or with fellow friends, students, or siblings, and try to see how far it goes. Stroop effect. And also, if you want to read more about it, you can also go to try SparkNotes. The Stroop effect, I'm sure, has been written, and also try to search it on APA website, where most of these experiments are also put. Since APA is one of the American Psychology Association, where we draw most of the principles in Namibia and much of African psychology, where we draw much of the regulations and principles, and also the way of study. But since psychology is all the same globally, it's just some certain recommendations which may differ. Looking at short-term memory, according to George Miller, 1956, in his research about the capacity of short-term memory, he found out that most of the people, they're able to retain 7 items. So it means it's 7 plus or minus. When we say 7 plus or minus, which means some they may remember 5, some they may remember 9. It's not like everybody or all the time, but the average of the times, most of the people, they remember 5 and also 9. That is quite common among a lot of people. So when you look at short-term memory, okay, check here, it's a temporary storage that processes incoming sensory memory. Sometimes it's called working memory. It depends with the research book that you are using. It depends on the research book that you are using. Some they would write short-term memory / working memory. Some they try to differentiate it. Like working memory, that's when you are using it, like the day-to-day activities, like what you're doing. I'm quite sure when you're watching the video, you're trying to learn, they will say you're also using the working memory. But another research book, they will say it's all the same short-term memory or working memory. It's all happening in the same circumference or in the same platform or capacity. So if you research some books which differentiate working and short-term memory, don't be shocked. It's common, but also try to understand why they put it aside. So in the short-term memory, information is displayed, isn't it? Like for a very good example, on a screen or what. So trying to see how much people can also remember. So in short-term memory, for information to go into a hard drive, which is the long-term memory, there's this scenario which is written here. This type of rehearsal, the conscious repetition of information to be remembered, to move short-term memory into long-term memory is called memory consolidation. Yes, that is rehearsal or memory consolidation. That is the one which helps us for information to go to long-term memory. Some of the issues, they may just go straight right there. You may not forget them since they have a certain significance that they may impact on your life. You may not need to rehearse. And then comes some other data or information that you need to rehearse for you to what? To understand. That's what they call memory consolidation, the step of rehearsal, where you try to recall and also try to spread the information and represent it mentally. There comes a figure below, which is written here. They say, explore the capacity and duration. Let's read it loud as it is written. Explore the capacity and duration of your short-term memory by have a partner read the strings of random numbers out loud to you, beginning each string by saying read and ending by saying recall. And at which point you should try to write down the string of numbers from memory. Yes, read and recall. So this will be just guiding you. When they say recall, then you start to write. Yes. Then they say note the longest string at which you got the series correct. For most people, this will be close to 7 plus minus numbers. Try it. For a very good example, you may use a recharge card, MTC recharge voucher, or TN recharge voucher that you have a lot of numbers, or what do you call it, an electricity voucher of yours, which have a series of numbers, and try to recall them aloud. You can conduct that experiment at home, you will be the leader, and see how much information people recall. So you read, then you read. You may try fast and then slow and intermediate and see how much can help people to grasp. Yes, memory, it also influences learning. So it's also another capacity and research that you also understand how the issue is all about. Then now moving to long-term memory, which is quite very influential when it comes to learning and other things that we do in our life. Long-term memory now, that is the longest capacity now, the storage of information. Long-term memory, for information to leave our long-term memory, it's all because of you forget or it decays over time, never being recalled, never being recognized or relearned. Then it decays, it just depreciate and depreciate. Or you forget, effortfully or non-effortfully. Very good example, scenarios which relates to trauma. That aspect, people, they forget, maybe they force themselves to forget, or some, because of the nature of the scenario, it ends up to decay by themselves. But now that's where the unconscious plays a role. It suppresses some of the things that we forcefully forget. It keeps them. Then they will bounce back in different dimension. It may not come back as trauma, but it comes back as a certain behavior, which psychologists try to relate to your past experience or to other things. Coming back to long-term memory, what they call is a continuous storage of information. It differs from short-term. It differs from what? From sensory memory. And the capacity for long-term memory has no limits. Some researchers, they equivalent our brains to 4 terabytes. Some, they equivalent it to infinity. That it depends with you, with your time, and also with the experiences of that information and how much you want to retain it. Very good example. I'm quite sure if you Google, there's one man who was suffering from autism. He's in Guinness Book of having sharp memory. That guy, he read 13,000 books in a library, and he can still remember everything that he read, including all those numbers that are written at the end of the book margin, the barcodes, and other preliminary pages. But the person is suffering from autism, you see. And also autism carries what do you call it? A person may have a problem, but can also carry another strength, memory. So, which means our memory is infinity in its nature, but it depending in recognition and also related scenarios. So in long-term memory, it is divided into 2 parts, explicit and implicit memory, so that to understand. Very good example when we read this part. Like the issue, understanding the different types is important because a person's age or particular types of brain trauma or disorders can leave certain types of long-term memory intact while having disastrous consequences for other types. Let's look at other types of long-term memory: explicit and implicit. So other types of memory, you will notice them in accordance with what is written in between. So explicit memory is that we consciously remember or try to recall. For example, if you're studying for a chemistry exam or a psychology exam. Very good example. Okay, we will bring back the diagram. With explicit memory, so with explicit memory, those are consciously remembered, things which roam around our mind, isn't it? Yes. Like, for instance, declarative memory, and so on and so on. Then comes implicit memory, are memories that are not part of our consciousness. They are memories formed from behaviors, which is non-declarative memory. So if you find declarative memory still the same as explicit memory, implicit memory, it goes on with other like non-declarative memory, isn't it? Things which are not part of our conscious. Very good example, coming down there, we have two structures of explicit memory and implicit memory. So coming from implicit memory, we have procedural memory. In what is a type of implicit memory? It stores information about how to do things. It's procedure. Very good example. Do you remember how to walk? Do you remember how to brush your teeth? For those who can drive, do you remember how to drive a car or how to swim the crow freestyle or whatever freestyle that you do? At first, when you learn, but then as time goes on, it becomes instinct. It becomes as it goes, as it goes, as it goes. Even for other people who follow boxing and martial arts, you'll find out as they train and as it goes, it comes back to these scenarios. You learn, then it becomes muscle memory. Then it starts to happen by itself. Coming back to implicit memory, which is declarative memory. This is storage about facts or events, personal experiences, isn't it? Which comes from semantic memory and episodic memory. So that's declarative memory. On our consciousness, we declare it, isn't it? Which means we pronounce it. Facts and events. Semantic memory, that are knowledge about words, concepts, and language based on knowledge and facts. So semantic memory, it's more about knowledge and facts. Whatever you know facts, it's semantic memory. Very good example. Who's the first president of Namibia? We all know, isn't it? Yes. Who's the second president of Namibia? We all know, isn't it? Yes. When we ask the word, what is democracy? We all know, isn't it? Yes. When we say freedom, even another question, the longest river in the world, it depends if you are aware of those things. Or I just ask you about facts. The capital city of Windhoek, you know because you're in Namibia. The capital city of South Africa. These are things we learn once we were at school about capital cities and so on and so on. Or even being asked like languages which are spoken in Botswana, in Zimbabwe, and other related countries. That's what semantic memory, knowledge about concepts, language, and certain things. Then episodic memory is more about events we personally experienced. So coming to Tuvin, let's read what they said. The concept of episodic memory was proposed about Tuvin, 1972, which will reflect in their, in their theory. So they looked in the scientific evidence and formulated the theory. Yes. So they believe that episodic memory is memory about happenings in particular places, at particular times, what, where, and when of an event. It involves recollection of visual imagery as well as the feeling of familiarity. Let's draw it back to the diagram which try to emphasize the types of memory that we have. Long-term memory, then it divided into two, declarative and non-declarative. What we were saying about episodic memory and then semantic memory. Then in implicit non-declarative, procedural, skills and actions that we have gone through. Then comes to emotional conditioning. Yes, I'm quite sure about emotions. We feel emotions, even if as much as we try to direct them. To some extent, we have the capacity to control some. To some extent, we don't have the capacity to control and withhold some. That's emotional conditioning. Yes. And you don't need to be told that you have to be angry when things go bad for you, or you don't need to be told to experience disgust or sadness. You just feel it and then it comes out. That's emotional conditioning. Coming back to young kids, when they're angry, they cry. When everything is teaching, they cry, they cry, they cry, they cry. Some of the things they don't understand, but as it goes, I'm sure when you were kids, when you're afraid, you cry. But now when you're afraid, you don't cry. You try to be safe or you panic. It depends. Then now comes to retrieval of information. And retrieval of information is also comes into 3 categories. Recall, which is here, is what we most often think of about when we talk about memory retrieval. It means you can access information without cues. When you say without cues or without, what do you call it, guidelines, or without hints, isn't it? For example, you would use recall for an essay test, isn't it? When you're writing a test or a certain test that we send on there, I'm sure you will record. You recall, it's like, okay, okay, okay. Then recognition, when you like going to pattern, to perception, happens when you identify information that you have previously learned after encountering it again. It involves the process of comparison. When you take a multiple test, you are relying on a recognition to help you choose the correct answer. Writing an essay test, you recall. Writing a multiple choice, another example, you what? You recognize. You what? You recognize. An example was put there. Graduated from high school 10 years ago and you have returned to your hometown for your 10-year reunion, isn't it? You may be able to recall some of your classmates. I'm sure you still remember some of your classmates of grade 5, grade 3, if they were removed from your school. Then comes another part of relearning. This one, it's easier. You have learned Oshivambo or Damara, Afrikaans, or Shona, but now you want to go, what do you call it? You are employed to a certain school or company again, which they want you to make use of that language. But because you've learned it some time back, you can still speak it, but not properly. You may need to relearn it again, just to recorrect the verbs. It's different from a person who's learning from scratch. It's different from a person who's learning from scratch, isn't it? Yes. You have learned it before, you have spoken it before, but you're now reconstructing again the same thoughts. So that's what relearning. Some of the 3 aspects that helps us to recognize, or to retrieve information from our long-term memory. Then comes the issues of components of memory. Those are part of our storage, is still the same, but they were just differentiated here. Yes. Then comes to early researches. We will never run away from Plato and Aristotle. Rationalism, that we understand the world. And the empiricists, they believe what? Basis of inquiry, isn't it? So those things guide us in trying to retrieve information, and also to try to understand the issues of memory, isn't it? Aristotle's ideas of how various elements are mentally linked to one another was also another scenario. Yes. Then comes the issues of Ambiguous, who also did a true student's memory in scientific form. So the guy studied also memory, or a contribution of experimental psychology when we refer to memory. So for our episode, we may end here. So the next episode, we start from the research, and then we go to models of memory, since they all move hand in hand. That's the reason why we didn't talk much about these ones. We didn't much talk about the researches of memory, read about it. Then from there, we jump into memory models and other related scenarios. And then we go to eyewitness and then forgetting. You have a wonderful time. But I will impose a question upon you as an activity that you may need to write. The question, it goes, what is memory? As well as structure or right components of memory and their uses upon us and how we tend to use them. That's a question that you have to recall after this lesson. You have a wonderful day.